Hi, how's it going? What's the word I'm looking for? I'd never heard that before. Thank you so much for everything you taught us. I really appreciate it. Okay, talk to you soon. Hey, Sabrina.
Hi, so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So you're surrounded by cats and they might be making noise, right?
They might be. They love whenever,
That's fine. That's fine.
okay, awesome. They love whenever I'm chatting with anyone. Usually they're super quiet when I'm just at home by myself, but as soon as I'm chatting with someone, they always want to participate in the conversation.
But that's perfect because you're a witch and your name is Sabrina and you have cats. So it all makes sense. So
Somehow I fucked up though. I didn't name one of my cats Salem. I probably should
oh
have.
man.
I
Well, there's
know.
always cats in the future that you can get. So Sabrina, tell us what it means to be a professional witch.
Yeah, so I think it's something that'll look a little bit different for everyone that has this particular job description because we all work a little bit differently. But for myself, it does involve a lot of one on one mentorship as well as teaching through things like online courses. But my one on one mentorship tends to involve teaching people how to engage with their spirituality in a way that feels right to them. And sometimes even troubleshooting their rituals, their magic, and things like that they might be experimenting with, or spell work, spellcraft, rituals, and all of that type of stuff. And I also do a lot of tarot readings for folks and tarot mentorship. So it's very, very diverse. In the past, I've actually been hired to do spell work for people as well. Sometimes people don't necessarily want to learn how to do it themselves. It's always my preference to teach people so that they can take ownership and embrace their own agency in their own lives. But sometimes people would rather just hire me to do the work. So on occasion, it does involve stuff like that too.
Okay, so what is spell work? Because I know that a lot of people they have a huge rejection of anything that is, witchy or, mentioned as a spell because it's like you're trying to manipulate someone else's life through that and without them being able to control that. So, what do you refer to as a spell and what do you use them for?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And I feel like this is a massive misconception that a lot of folks who maybe don't have a ton of experience in the witchy space might have. And I think this is largely due to pop culture. The most common spells or magic that you hear talked about in movies or whatever often involves spell work around love. I just watched one of my old witchy favorite movies from I think the late 90s or early 2000s, Practical Magic with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but one of my favorite witchy movies ever. And even that movie, even though I absolutely love it, some of the most common spell work in that movie is love spells, and it's so interesting because that is, while a lot of people do come to me for that type of work, I see part of my job as a witch, and not everyone works this way, but I like to help redirect people and help them reframe what it is they're asking me for and redirect them often into something else, right? So if someone comes to me asking, oh, I'm in love with this person, or I just got a message recently, someone was saying, well, the girl I'm in love with is ghosting me. I need you to do a spell to make her obsessed with me. And I was like, dude, no, we're not going to do that, first of all. Second of all, like, why would you want someone who doesn't want you? Third of all, let's maybe do some self love magic instead so that you can summon up that love inside yourself for yourself. And instead of fixating on a particular person and controlling them, I highly don't like that type of work. Some people will do it, in all of my teachings with my own life and the people that I work with, I always will recommend against it. I won't do that type of work for people for so many different reasons. First of all, I find it kind of boring. Second of all, I'm all about self love and teaching people self love, self worth, self respect. And if someone doesn't want you, like the biggest advice I always give to my clients is like, let that person go. So depending on the person I'm working with, how I would be framing all of that is like, okay, maybe instead of doing a ritual to have this person who is ghosting you be obsessed with you, maybe let's do a ritual where you can release your attachment to this person who doesn't like you anyway. That's the direction that I would be encouraging people to go in instead. I really find those love workings that are all about controlling someone else, it's a waste of everyone's time. It will often work, to be honest with you, but that type of magical work does need to be maintained constantly. So, on a practical level, it's exhausting. On an ethical level, it's sketchy. And also on a self love, self worth level, it also shows a scarcity mindset and a lack of self belief that there will be someone that will love you for exactly who you are without any persuasion. Right. And so this is something I always try to teach my clients, whether they want to do controlling work around someone else, around love, around business, around whatever it happens to be. I tend to try to help them reframe it to something else. And so instead of controlling others, oftentimes I'll redirect them to some kind of magic that involves self control, magic on themselves to attract something or release something. But again, like I really don't believe in that will bending type of stuff. The only exception I will make to that type of thing is whenever I am working with generally women, but really anyone who has been abused or who is trying to leave a dangerous situation. And so in that case, like, am I happy to teach someone how to control someone who is a threat to their safety? Like, absolutely. And in that case, it would be like, keep this person far away from me. And sometimes whenever I've done workings for that for folks, like when it was really safety was involved, thankfully those people, they're dangerous people, ended up moving cities. So I think that kind of work is ethically justified, but when it comes to just like, "Oh, my crush isn't ignoring me. Can you make them like me?" My answer is like, "No."
It's very manipulative, and I love the idea that you try to redirect people and say, "No, no, no, let's bring it back to you, and let's see where what you're lacking in, that you would think that this is even acceptable." And the keeping someone away, I'm telling you, the greatest thing about my ex-husband is that he lives in another country. Because I would not want to live anywhere near him, so I do understand that. Sabrina, so your episode is going to come out in January, but we're recording just a few days after Halloween. So how do you celebrate Halloween?
Oh, man. So it really differs year by year. But, personally, I tend to see this like Halloween, Samhain, whatever you wanna call it. The common witchy name for it is Samhain, which has origins in the British Isles and Ireland and that whole region. This whole time of year, it does tend to be associated with those who have passed, right? Our ancestors, the holy dead, whether those ancestors are ancient ancestors that we've never met and we don't know their names because they're hundreds and hundreds of years old, or whether it's the example I always use is like your dead Uncle Bob or whoever that you knew in life who has passed recently. So I tend to do work around this time that involves contacting for messages and also honoring those people. So I always do a lot of ancestor based work as it is day to day anyway. But at this time of year, I do find it, I don't know, like relevant and fun and interesting to really lean into that ancestral connection. As at least I'm in Canada, and so all the leaves are kind of dying right now. The leaves are shifting, it's getting colder. We're doing that cycle of the year thing where everyone is kind of thinking about death because the leaves are literally dying. We can see the world and the plants kind of start to hibernate and shift. And so it makes sense to echo a lot of that energy, at least up here where I live in Canada. And of course, I'm sure people listening to this probably live in lots of different climates, but relating our own practice to what is going on outside, I think is something that is a really common thread throughout many different cultures. And so for me, it is honoring the dead, honoring those who have passed. And so depending on the year, sometimes I'll set out a bunch of offerings or do what's called a dumb supper. So cooking a massive meal and setting out table placements and chairs for the ancestors, sometimes with their photos or little name card placement. And I'll often do a lot of prayer and automatic writing and some mediumship to see if they have any messages for me or any advice as we move into the next year.
So your way of celebrating Halloween seems much more like the Mexican Dia de los Muertos than the American consumerism, chocolate, dressing up type of thing. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I have never dressed up for Halloween as an adult like I did as a kid, obviously, because I think all kids kind of do in North America. But no, for me, it's a lot more serious. It's a lot more, I don't want to say solemn, but I think as I've gotten older, I've been able to appreciate some aspects of the typical North American Halloween is I think it's possible also to ride the wave of everyone's excited energy around Halloween, right? So it's like I think we can reject some of the mindless consumerism of it all if we are living in a place where everyone is going hard for that typical candy costumes Halloween. Like we don't have to participate in that ourselves, but I think it's possible if we're witchy people, if we're spiritual people, if we're people who are interested in energy, I think the quality of energy collectively around Halloween is quite high and quite positive, actually. And I think it's possible, just like going to a sports match or something, we can feel that electricity in the air. And I don't know about you, but the last time I've gone to sports matches, I've left like super excited, super up to 11. Like I just felt so buoyant and excited. And I feel like, even walking around our neighborhoods, on Halloween, before Halloween, after Halloween. I did a walk around last night, and a lot of people still had their decorations up. I could still feel that energy in the air, right? And so I think there is something really beautiful about being able to notice and work with that collective excitement. Even if you're not going to wear a costume, even if you're not going to buy like $1 million of candy, it's still possible to ride this positive energy that I think a lot of people are expressing around this time of year too. So I love to kind of incorporate both of those things. Like I love to go for the pumpkin parade and look at all the different pumpkin carvings, and then I'll go home and do my ancestor based work as well. So I don't think we have to pick one or the other. I think it's possible to have that solemn, quiet, contemplative, meditative piece that you do for your own self and your own ancestors and your own spiritual practice. And then to also be able to incorporate the excitement of the energetic collective too.
Yeah, I love that. You did mention one thing that I'd never heard of before. What is a dumb supper?
Mhm. So basically, it's a supper for the dead. So I will eat dinner, and so the dead will also eat dinner. And so I'll often cook something, right? It depends on my mood, depends on the year. Sometimes it'll be something from my heritage. Sometimes it'll be something that more reminds me of where I grew up. It kind of varies, but it's cooking often a quite elaborate feast and having some food out for yourself and then leaving some food out for your deceased relatives as well. And it's interesting, Rex. A lot of people are like, oh my God, no, I'd be wasting food to leave it out for the dead. Isn't that a waste? And my attitude is like, no. Like, I love the idea of giving the ancestors, giving these spirits who are watching over you some of the fruits of your labor. It's an appreciation, it's an offering. To me, that's not a waste at all. And I think it's important to look at it as offering gratitude, appreciation, because it's because of the ancestors why we're here today, right? None of us would be alive if it wasn't for our ancestors and that lineage. And so our ancestors do walk with us. I think whether we talk to them a lot or not, whether we notice them or not, and some people's ancestors are going to be really, really loud. Some people's ancestors are going to be really quiet. But regardless, I do believe that all of us have those spirits that walk with us. And so I just think it's a great opportunity to offer them that gratitude in the form of a meal. And so the way that I understand this is as the spirits sit with you, they're kind of going to suck up the life force, the energy of the food, the drinks that you're offering to them. And so oftentimes, like if you were to eat anything off of those plates, the common thought is that it would probably not taste as good as what's on your plate because the spirits have sucked up all the nutrients and all the flavor and all the taste. And so depending on what it is, obviously, if it's certain things, you might not want to leave it outside because it might poison the animals. But if it is something like just an apple, like leaving that outside as well for the nature spirits and the land spirits. In my case, the raccoons, excuse me, are everywhere in my neighborhood. And so there is this cycle of life kind of aspect of that, right? Giving offerings to our ancestors and also giving offerings to the land, right? Because the land, in my opinion, is also an ancestor. The land has been here for a very, very long time. And ultimately, we're guests on animals' territory.
Yeah, that's true. I love that. I never heard of that before, but that was a fantastic explanation. Sabrina, how did you even get into all of this? Were you a little girl dressing up as a witch? Were you interested in crystals and tarot and oracle and crystal balls, or did this come much later in life?
You know what? This is going to shock everyone, but I've never in my life dressed up as a witch ever. So, like, I've never worn a pointy hat ever. Like, I don't know why. Actually, yes, I do. So, I think because I took witchcraft so seriously from such a young age, like, I've been doing this work since I was like 8 years old. I always was really not into the stereotypical representations of witches because I was like, no, I'm a serious witch. Take me seriously. And I felt like the pointy hat, the outfits, all that stuff, I felt like it really made it all look very childish and not serious. And like it was just a fairy tale stuff, you know? And as an adult, I think I care a bit less. But as a kid, I was very much like, no, this is serious. And obviously, I still think it's serious, but I think I can like lighten up a bit now that I'm a little bit older. But I grew up in something called spiritualism. And so, what that basically is it's a religion that came up in the 1850s in upstate New York. And the whole concept behind spiritualism is it considers itself a science, a religion, and a philosophy. And part of the point of it is to basically prove the existence of life after death, aka the continuation of the soul after the departure of the physical body. And so it involves a lot of mediumship, a lot of energy healing, a lot of channeling, and their whole thing is giving evidence for the continuation of spirit, basically. So I grew up with that. So that's kind of my bread and butter. I've been reading tarot since I was that age as well, but the witchcraft thing is all me. No witches in my family, as far as I'm aware, but my grandmother was a medium. My mom is a medium. And so that kind of just goes back.
Yeah, I was about to ask. So, if you grew up in spiritualism, that means that those around you, the adults around you, were in this as well. So, tell us about a little bit about your mom's mediumship and your grandmother, and then how you realized that you were a medium.
Yeah, so it's kind of a tough thing to talk about, to be honest with you, 'cause I'm not on good terms with my family, which I think is the case for a lot of people. My mom, I don't have a lot of good things to say about her, to be honest with you, but one of the things that I am very grateful for is that she did expose me to spiritualism and mediumship and all of that when I was so young. You know, like despite all other things, like I will always be very thankful and grateful for that. So I think it really shifted my perspective on a lot of things, right? Like as a kid, like you kind of have this idea that the world is magical, right? I've always felt that the whole world, the land, the plants, the books, everything has energy, has a spirit. I've always been an animist. But what was so nice about growing up in that space, and what's interesting is that my dad thought it was all bullshit. So, like, you know, obviously my parents got a divorce, like, clearly. So there was always that tension, right, in the house where my dad was like, you people are fucking crazy. And then I really believed, you know, I always really believed. And then my mom obviously believed. And so there was always this kind of in the midst of conflict with it in a way. And like I would always go anyway, but I knew that would be met with displeasure, obviously, from my dad. So there was some tension with that. But I always had to kind of stick true to my own belief system and my own truth, which has always been that, yeah, this spiritual stuff is real. And so it was really, really nice to be in this space where, you know, I would be able to say to my mom, like, oh, like, okay, like I can see this spirit and to be able to touch base. And then when we're both seeing the same spirit and our notes on this same spirit overlap, that to me is really meaningful in terms of building that confidence as a medium, and then also building confidence in the fact of mediumship and in the fact of spirits hanging out, right? Because when you're a new medium, whether you're 8 years old or 50 years old, it's really easy to convince yourself, like, oh, I'm just making this up, or this is total bullshit, or my imagination is running wild. It's really, really easy for people to convince themselves of that, right? And I do have to work on that with my students quite often. A lot of them have this self doubt. And so building that confidence that people are not making stuff up is a really, really big part of skill building, right? For anyone who is doing this type of spiritual work. And so I'm very, very blessed that I was able to at least have that as a kid, right? To be able to go into these spaces and have my visions of spirits or my impressions be confirmed by other people, or to have other people bring up something first. And then for me to be like, oh shit, I see that spirit too. I just didn't say anything about it. And so for me, that overlap of confirmation was very, very valuable.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about your family. I know that not always our tribe is good for us, as we move on and we choose to live the life that we want to live. But I think it's always sad to hear. I did want to ask you, so how do you, as a medium, how does it work for you? Which of the clairs do you work with, or do you work with all of them?
Yeah, good question. So I can access all of them. I would say my most common ones would be clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and claircognizance. Those would be my top ones, I would say, where information comes through.
Okay, so can you give us, Sabrina, a story of a mediumship reading that you did that was transformative for someone, or maybe one of your more life-changing or original ones that you were involved in?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting because with the readings that I do, I actually don't really advertise myself as a medium, even though it is something that I can do. And part of the reason for that is I feel like a lot of time people who are seeking out just a medium, it's not often for the right reasons, or it's for reasons that might be very genuine, but might come from a place of extreme pain. And while I have so much sympathy and like love and understanding for those folks, what I have seen, unfortunately, very, very often, like growing up in spiritualism where mediumship is like the main thing, I see a lot of people in this kind of, and by people, I mostly mean like clients, like not mediums, like people who seek out mediums. I see a lot of people who are just so in these cycles of pain that they never emerge from. Right. And so I see some people, a lot of people, who have this obsession with seeking out mediums to kind of keep them in this cycle of mourning and misery and pain and grief, and this attachment to the past in a way that is not useful. And the other thing I tend to see is they're relying on external people to do this communication. And so I would much prefer to teach people how to do this work for themselves, because then, first of all, they don't have to rely on me, and that might not be great for my finances. But for me, I would so much rather teach people, because then they can make this contact with those they love for themselves regularly. And for me, that's when I see the most potent transformation. And for me, that is the most meaningful and life changing. Because have I given tarot readings for people where surprisingly someone's dead person will come through and say something that I find very random and kind of nonsensical, but then when I decide to say it, the person bursts out crying? Like, yes, that happens honestly more often than not. At the same time, for me, those aren't the most meaningful experiences. For me, those aren't the most life-changing experiences, because that's just a one-off, right? It's like them working with me and I do my thing and that's cool. And then they go off and do their merry day. You know what I mean? But what I find the most meaningful and life changing is when I'm able to work with people over time, whether that's in a course or whether that's through extended one-on-one coaching, like whatever, where they actually challenge their own limiting beliefs about their own spiritual power, where instead of them coming to me saying, you know what, Sabrina, like, I really want to talk to my ancestors, but I can't, or I'm not good enough. I don't have that natural connection like you do. And I'm always like, well, that's bullshit. Let's work on it. Let me show you. And so whenever I work with someone and they go from feeling like they can't do it or it's not possible, and then I move them from that to maybe a month or 2 or 3 or 6 months later, they're making regular contact with their ancestors. They've got a working ancestor altar and they're able to touch in with their spirits and they know what their own clairs are, as you asked me before. For me, that is the real deal. For me, that is what I live for. And that's what makes me the most excited, right? Is putting these tools back into people's hands. Because I don't want to be like, I don't know, like the Pope of witchcraft or like the Pope of mediumship, where it's like there's no direct contact. It's like, no, I want to teach people how to do that direct contact. Because if I'm touching in with these random spirits that I don't know and probably will not meet again, what use is that to anybody? Like, it might be useful for that, that hour-long reading, and maybe that person will be very moved about that and by that for the next year or two. That's great. But what I'm much more interested in is sustainability, right? This sustaining those spiritual relationships, because spiritual relationships, in my mind, it shouldn't be a one-off, right? Spirits love regular communication, just like my friends into the flesh. You know what I mean? Like, relationships are based off of repetition, consistency, time. And so if I can teach people to maintain those spiritual relationships with their ancestors, for me, that is the ultimate. Like, that is what I find the most life-changing. And I also think that whenever my clients have been able to rise and meet that challenge and follow through and put in the work and get the results, I think that is what they also tend to find the most meaningful and life-changing.
You mentioned that you had just recently done a tarot. Tell me what you did, because I'm not going to remember what it was. Mediumship for tarot, or what was it they just
So
did?
leading up to Halloween, aka Samhain, as many witches call it, I taught 2 workshops. Actually, no, it wasn't workshops. They were masterclasses taught back to back. So one of them was Ancestor Magic Masterclass, and the other one was Tarot for Mediumship Masterclass. And so both of those were kind of introductory pieces to this type of work that I'm talking about. So I talked a lot about setting up an altar, how to communicate with the dead. I talked a little bit about the clairs. And tarot for mediumship, I'm actually very, very excited about that in particular because it's something I haven't really heard many people talk about. And to be honest with you, in spiritualism, the context that I grew up in, working with the tarot and tools and pendulums and stuff like that was kind of seen as a bit of a crutch. They're focused very much on old school pure mediumship. And I totally get that. And I think I'm so glad that there are places that continue to teach that pure mediumship. At the same time, when I'm working with people who are not going to be professional mediums, have no interest in doing that, but they want to communicate with their own ancestors and keep it in the family in a way. For me, something like working with the tarot for mediumship is so amazing, especially for beginners, because the tarot, like, you can't really argue with it, right? I was talking earlier about building spiritual confidence. And with the tarot, it's like you're seeing this card right in front of you. And when you flip it over, it's like, well, there it is. And so whenever people are receiving messages, let's say as newbie mediums, they might, again, like I said earlier, think, oh, I'm making this up, or maybe I'm just imagining this. But when you're actually pulling cards, it's like, well, no, there's the card. It literally is right there. And so in the masterclass, I talk about how to read the court cards as different ancestors, how to read the cards to get to know your ancestors more, and also how to use the cards to receive messages from your ancestors as well. I think it's such a great, great tool, especially for folks who are beginners and who may be a little bit wiffle waffly, I guess, a bit in their confidence level. It's because it is that very visual, concrete place from which to start. So I just think it's awesome for newbies, especially. Yeah.
And aside from that, what other things that you love so much that you've created master classes around or courses, or what are the things that you teach on your channel or your
Yeah,
website?
so my biggest courses, they're all ending in the without bullshit title. So I teach magic without bullshit, tarot without bullshit, and then my most new one is called feminine energy without bullshit. So tarot without bullshit has been running since 2019 and magic without bullshit since 2020. And so I created those courses. I'll talk about those first since they kind of go together. So both of those are, I think Tarot Without Bullshit is 20 hours of content, and then Magic Without Bullshit is 24 hours of content, and they both have more than 100 pages of worksheets. So I actually used to be a university professor for like 4 years. So I taught both illustration practice as well as theory in like the biggest auditorium of the university. I've got a master's with a diploma in education. And so teaching and teaching people in a way that they remember things, in a way that they'll be able to relate it to their everyday life is really, really important to me. Like, I really don't believe in teaching through memorizing. Like, I think, the evidence is out that that doesn't really work. It's not effective as a teaching method. But I created these courses because there is so much, unfortunately, bullshit on the internet and in the community about tarot and about witchcraft and magic, right? Like, everyone is just so confused. A lot of people teaching it don't really know what they're doing. A lot of the tarot courses are the same. It's just like lists of this card means this, that card means that. And that's not how I teach at all. Like, I teach in this way where we're grounding in the visual. Tarot is a visual medium, right? It's all based on illustrations. So a lot of what I'm doing in that course is teaching people how to see and also how to build up and notice their own internal library of meaning, right? So for me, for instance, I love owls. I love the moon tarot card. But for a lot of people, owls and the moon are very negative, let's say. But for me, whenever I see the moon come up, I'm like, oh, yay, it's my card, right? And so to notice our own symbolisms, our own libraries of meaning, as I call it, all of that is really, really important. What I want all my students to be able to do by the time they're done with my courses is to be able to do magic, do tarot in a way that is unique to them, right? They don't have to do it exactly the way I do it. That's okay. But I want to teach people how to bring themselves into the way that they read tarot and also the way that they do magic. Earlier in this call, you mentioned, like, I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but it reminded me that there's a lot of people who might be worried about tarot or magic due to, let's say, religious hangups. And so, one of the things that I often will experience with some of my students, particularly in Magic Without Bullshit, is perhaps they grew up very Christian or they grew up with a very religious household, and yet they're very interested in magic. How do they reconcile that? And so, with my course, especially the Magic Without Bullshit course, a lot of it is based on cosmology. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? And how can you reconcile? Let's say your mom is Buddhist and your dad is Roman Catholic. Like, and then you're witchy. Like, how do you incorporate all of those things to create a cohesive spiritual story for yourself that feels authentic? And so, yes, the course is about magic, but it's also about that, because I feel like a lot of witchcraft stuff doesn't actually talk about what do we believe? Why do we believe it? What is energy? What are the clairs? Like, all of that stuff. So there is some typical like magic stuff in there. Like, there's a whole module about candle magic and going really in depth into that. But there's also that stuff on belief in cosmology. So since I'm doing a PhD in philosophy of science, God help me, a lot of what I do and what I teach, it's so grounded in the why, right? The reason behind things. And I always encourage my students to ask those questions, both of me and also of themselves. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Why do I believe this? Why do I not? All of that stuff is for me really, really important when I teach. And then feminine energy without bullshit is more recent. And I would say since my tarot and magic without bullshit courses, they're very based on energy work, cosmology, energy, vibes, all of that stuff. And they're very, I would say, kind of agnostic in terms of gender. So in both of those courses, I talk about energy in a very gender neutral way. I talk about like active and receptive energy and all of that. But I decided to make this course on feminine energy and actually lean into what is that specifically and how can women generally, but the course is open to anyone who is interested, embrace this notion of feminine energy in a particular way. So it's a little bit more of an advanced course, I would say. It's probably my most controversial course because there is just so much I don't know, gender agnosticism these days, and I think that can be really, really useful and really beautiful. And I think it's okay to explore what does feminine energy actually mean, and does it have to mean docile and passive? Can it mean power in a different way? So that's something that I'm personally very interested in lately, and so I figured it might as well share that with people as I explore it and learn it for myself.
Perfect. The other thing I'm going to ask to include in the description is I have in the description of all the videos my favorite oracle cards, which is Wisdom of the Oracle by Colette Baron Reed and Sacred Traveler by Denise Lynn. So I'm going to ask you to send me a list of the oracle cards that you love and that you recommend to people who are just starting or who are, even if you're not just starting, give me a list of the things that you love and I'll include it below. Sabrina, where can people reach you if they'd like to work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am very loud on Instagram at Sabrina M. Scott on Instagram. My website obviously is sabrinamscott.com. There's a little contact form thing. My email address is CEO at sabrinamscott.com. I'm also on YouTube, youtube.com/Sabrina Scott. I guess there's not as many Sabrinas on YouTube, so I was able to get it without the M. But I think those are the main places. I am all over the internet, so find me and I will say hello. I love hearing from folks and I love working with people one on one, and seeing people's transformation is honestly the best part of my week always.
Yeah, I just followed you on Instagram. Sabrina, thank you so much for everything that you taught us. I think that we could actually do maybe a second episode if people like this one, depending on what other things you'd love to talk about and teach us. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be so much fun.
Okay, fantastic. Sabrina, thank you so much for everything you taught us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here. This was a blast.